One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I feel weird coming into today's episode, and I know why. And it's going to become very clear, but if you couldn't tell from the title of this episode, that we are getting ultra meta today. And I'm talking to you and teaching you something that is happening in my content in real time. And I don't typically do this, right? I like for there to be some distance with going through something, and then you turn around and you talk about it and, you learn from it. But this isn't anything that I've never experienced before when it comes to changing up my content, pivoting, rebranding, going from one format to another. Like, I have done multiple iterations of this over the lifetime of all of my different types of content, from email marketing to podcasting, YouTube, you name it. I have done several iterations of changing things up, but today's a little different because I will be going through some major changes in my business and in my content over the next quarter of the year and just for the foreseeable future. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to tell you all about it. I'm going to share with you why things are changing. And if you are in the place of wanting to make some changes in your content, I hope that you find some inspiration, some wisdom, and hopefully some tips and strategies to make this transition easier for you. But let's get into it. We're going to talk about how to handle changes in your content in today's episode. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Proffitt Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Proffitt, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? So here's the backstory, because I know if I go on any longer without telling you what's really going on, I'm going to get a flood of DMs and messages that are like, no, what's really happening? I have recently accepted a position to go to work for an organization. Now, I'm not going to disclose all the details behind it, but what has happened is I'm going to be joining another team as a content strategist. And in reality, it's a dream job. It is a dream opportunity. And it's something that I can tell you, after all the hard work that has gone into what I've created here at Proffitt Media, from the podcast, from the YouTube channel, from social media posts to courses and building everything in my business, I have exponentially learned so much more doing things on my own than I would have working for another organization, probably even for the last 5 years. Like, everything was just expedited because I had to do all these things. But in the process of realizing what this change and transition period is going to look like for my content, I realized I've got to scale everything way, way back, way, way back. Now, if you've been around here for a while, that I produce a lot of content. A lot of content. If you've never watched my YouTube videos where I talk about this, I mean, y'all, let's just talk about, there's 2 episodes of the podcast here, 5 episodes on the Potty Report, 3 YouTube videos a week, 1 email newsletter, and on top of that, social post in the Facebook group and on my Instagram and all the other places. It's a lot of content. It's a lot of content. And in realizing my new schedule, I am still able to continue my content creation, which was fantastic. I was a little nervous about taking a position where I was, if I was told you'd have to just give up all of your business and all of your content, that would make me really nervous. But thankfully, that is not the case for this new position. But I'm realistic, and I know that I don't want to burn myself out. I don't want to be totally overwhelmed with a brand new role, a brand new position at an organization, and trying to keep things as normal, keep things as the same way that I've known them to be for at least the last 12 months. I have been publishing content at scale, and in looking at my calendars and how I would be able to still fit in what I love to do, which is come here with you and talk on the podcast and still do YouTube and send out my email newsletter. How can I make this work? And what I've decided is I'm going to be moving for the foreseeable future, and I may change things up. This is another beautiful thing about having your own podcast and making your own decisions and being your own boss in your business and in your content is, for the next quarter, I'm doing a trial, right? For the next 90 days, I'm going to scale everything back to 1 podcast episode a week, 1 YouTube video a week, and my email newsletter. I'm going to continue doing the Potty Report.
Could you say that again?
Siri just interrupted me. I know. She just wanted to know what I was talking about. I don't even know why what keyword made her wake up, but here we go. Let me turn her off for a second. But it's scaling everything way, way down. And what I was going to say, I'm like, she totally messed me up. I lost my train of thought. What I was going to say is I'm going to continue to do episodes of the Potty Report. They may not be the exact same way. Like, this is the part there's still a little gray area of how everything is going to be executed over the next quarter. But if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss you, like I want to hear from you on a more regular basis, then I invite you to come hang out with me on the Potty Report, where I do publish Monday through Friday, and it's 5 minutes or less. So it's short, digestible content. If you've never listened to it before, I'm going to link to it in the show notes. So crystalproffitt.com/episode 345 is where you're going to find the show notes for today's episode. And okay, now I want to get into why I think this is a beautiful time for these changes to be happening. I am very compartmentalized whenever I think about my business, my schedules, and how I like to plan my content. And we are at the end of a quarter. When this episode goes live, we are literally, it's like March 31st. It is end of quarter one, 2022. So I couldn't have asked for a better, I guess, a clean break in my content to be able to try this new experiment to see, could I add in more content in the future, or should I let something else go? Like, I'm really trying to strip everything down to the bare bones. That way I can see this is a sustainable pattern for me. I'm able to keep going, and I can use, the same schedule that I've had or that I will have at the end of this next quarter. And so it was just a great time for something to change. And I bring all this up because I wanted to share with you a few things that I have learned whenever it comes to changes in my content. Now, there's a good comparison that I have between making changes on my YouTube channel and making changes on my podcast. And I actually have a YouTube video coming out on Friday, which this airs on a Thursday. Check it out on Friday. You're going to see a YouTube video where I talk about handling changes in your content. But the big elephant in the room that I address in the video is, how do you address changes? Do you actually say something to your audience, or do you just make the changes and you're just like, it's my content, I can do whatever I want, I don't have to make any changes? And it's funny because I kind of did this backwards, and I recorded the YouTube video first, and now I'm recording this, but technically this is going to come out before the YouTube video does. So I'll link to it in the show notes in the future to make sure that you can go, and if you're listening to this at a future date, you'll be able to watch that YouTube video. But it's an interesting question because the way that I view my YouTube subscribers is different than how I view my podcast listeners. Now, maybe you're listening and you're like, well, Crystal, I'm both. I listen to your podcast and I watch your YouTube videos. Well, then you are the exception and not the rule, because I know that not everyone who watches my YouTube videos also listens to this podcast, and vice versa. So I knew that in creating these changes, I needed to address my message differently for the podcast than I would for my YouTube channel. And to be honest, I probably could have made changes, and I have made changes on my YouTube channel without saying anything, and no one noticed. But you can bet your bottom dollar if I stopped showing up on this podcast on a regular basis, I'd get notes. I would get messages from people that said, hey, where are you? What's going on? Are you okay? Are you sick? Because the relationship that I have with you, my sweet podcast listeners, it's different. It's different. I feel like we have a different connection than people that are kind of passive watchers on YouTube and they're not fully engaged on my content over there as much as you are here on the podcast. So I hope that makes sense, but I wanted to let you know there are two different ways to approach this, but that's the big question. Do you address it? Do you say something? Or do you not say anything? And I wanted to give you a few examples and tell you a little bit of the pros and the cons to each option, because I don't think that you can go right or wrong with either one. You definitely have pros and cons to each. So let's first talk about if you decide that you want to address, you're making changes. And I know so many of you, several of you are students in Proffitt podcasting, and you launch your podcast, and then about 2 or 3 months in, you will email me, you'll reach out to me and say, I thought I wanted my show this one way, but I think I want to change things up. Do I tell my audience? Do I actually say something, or do I not say anything? And there's two different ways that you can do it, right? You can say something or not say something. But if you say something, let's talk about the pros and what this actually looks like. So if in the past, this is what I've done. When I announced the rebrand from the Rookie Life to the Proffitt podcast, I released a bonus episode. This is what I did. Instead of releasing like an episode that would be something that has show notes and it's a whole thing. And I was just like, you know what? I just want to do a bonus episode that I could take down in the future if I wanted to. I remember whenever I recorded it, I wasn't sure if I would want that to live on the podcast forever and ever, because I'm like, well, it's going to be weird later if somebody sees that. And then they would say, wait, this podcast has been the Proffitt podcast all along. And now I see that things changed. But as you can tell, because I've left every episode I've ever aired, I don't care about that anymore, about the formality of putting up a bonus episode and then taking it down. I think that that's a lot of work, but you could release a bonus episode saying, hey guys, things are changing. Here's why we're making changes. Here's what that looks like. You could send an email to your list and tell them the exact same things, like this is what's happening, this is why, if you wanted to make this big explanation. And I think it really just depends on the relationship that you have with your audience. Because I know some of you have huge followings and you have a massive audience either on social media or your email list, even on your podcast. And you're like, well, people would ask a lot of questions, so it's better to just head them off at the beginning and you decide you're going to make this announcement. So this is how you could do it. And the pro to doing this is it keeps your audience informed of what they can expect in your content. But two, it also can get them excited about what's to come. So if, let's say you were talking about one specific thing in your content, but then you realize, you know what, I really need to narrow my focus and get even more niche down and talk about this specific thing because it's what my audience really wants to talk about. And you announce to them, hey guys, we're changing things up and I'm going to switch it to where we talk about this other topic instead, then your audience may be really excited about it and say, yes, we can't wait. When's it coming? But let's talk about the con, because there's a con to doing this. And that is, it leaves opportunities for people to question if this is the right decision for your content. So you're kind of leaving yourself wide open to have people give you all of their feedback. And we've talked about feedback many times on this podcast, where it's usually a positive thing. Like, oh, your podcast marketing, you want to get lots of customer feedback and listener feedback and really understand what people want and how you can give it to them. But there's times when you're like, I'm making this decision and my audience's opinion isn't going to sway me against what I've already decided. And that's one of the things where you could get a huge influx of people saying, well, you shouldn't do it on Wednesdays because that's the one day where I have blah, blah, blah. Or I hate to see you go from 2 episodes down to 1. Like, what am I going to do in my spare time? Or what am I going to do instead? Like, there can be a backlash to making this big announcement, making a big hoopla about making changes. So just be aware of that. I don't tell you this to discourage you from making an announcement. I just let you know, like what I announced today on this episode, I may have a few of you reach out to me and say, what are you talking about? You're doing this? You're not going to keep going on this path that you've been going on for a while? I'm fully prepared to receive those types of comments and those types of emails, messages, like bring it on. It's fine. It's cool. Like I invite those types of things, but it's why I wanted to tell you about it in today's episode, because I've lived through this multiple times already. This isn't my first rodeo, okay? Or like we say in Texas, this ain't my first rodeo. That's probably the most Texan I've ever intentionally tried to sound on this podcast. But let's talk about, what if you make changes and you don't say anything? Because this is what I recently did with my YouTube channel. Kind of here on the podcast, you may have noticed that we rebranded the audio clip that you hear at the beginning. It's still very similar to what it has been for hundreds of episodes when it says, welcome to the Proffitt Podcast. I switched it to, instead of just talking about podcasting, we're talking about content creation and content strategy, creating content with confidence, right? We've changed it a little bit. It was a subtle change, but you knew that things were a little bit different. On the YouTube channel, I didn't say anything. I just changed a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I didn't make an announcement. I didn't make a video about it. I didn't say, oh, this is why things are changing and this is how they're changing. I didn't do any of that. So I did not explain to my audience what was happening. And that's actually one of the pros of doing this is you just make the shift and you don't feel the need to create a bonus episode and create a YouTube video, write an email to your audience, post on social media. You just make the change and you just go. That's a pro because it's a lot faster. There's not a lot of, questioning, should I say something? And you're just like, nope, I'm just going to make the change. It's kind of like ripping off the Band-Aid, right? I'm just going to rip off the Band-Aid and make it happen. But the cons to this is your audience can just feel blindsided. And I know that sounds a little dramatic, but it is how it feels. Because I've actually had this happen where I'm listening to a podcast, regularly for a really long time. And then all of a sudden they stop publishing. I'm like, well, that's weird. They missed a week. And then the next week, they don't publish either. And then the next week, they don't publish. And then I go and I look and I'm like, oh, they totally rebranded. They just stopped their podcast altogether. Well, that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth as a consumer because I'm like, what the heck happened? Like, where'd you go? Why did you just abandon us? So it's one of the things that you have to be aware of that could happen if you don't make any announcement, you don't address it, you just kind of brush it under the rug that you made changes and you move forward. That you can, instead of, the first one was you'd get unwanted feedback necessarily from your audience, but this way you may have a little bit of animosity from your audience. That's like, hey, what happened? Like, dude, because I have 3 boys, I hear bro all the time. Bro, what happened? Why'd you leave us hanging? That was my sore attempt to sound like one of the YouTubers that they follow, and I should just stop because that was terrible. But one of the other things is you could, and it makes me sad to even think about this happening to this podcast or anybody else's content, is you could just have people saying, we don't like your changes. And I loved when you had 2 podcast episodes a week, and I don't like the 1 episode a week. It's not for me. It was much better. Your show was so much better whenever it was 2 episodes a week instead of 1. Or I loved it when you published 3 YouTube videos instead of 1, and they could leave.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Oh, it's terrible, right? Like just the thought of it makes me cringe and it makes my stomach flip a little bit that somebody would be so upset with changes that I'm making in my business and in my content that they would just pick up and leave and say, sorry, this ain't what I signed up for. I'm just going to go take my business elsewhere, right? Take my earbuds. I totally smashed 2 words together. AirPods and earbuds together. I'm going to take my earbuds somewhere else because you decided to make a change. And that's what you have to realize. That's the harsh reality of making changes in your content is not everybody's going to stick around. And not everyone will love the fact that you made a change in your content, but that's also life, right? That is life. There are changes that happen, and we've talked about changes before. We talked about, there's one of my favorite episodes of the Potty Report that I'm so proud of the title of this episode because it just makes me smile every single time. And it's a saying that my brother and I don't know if he got it from somebody. He has a lot of we'll call them redneck isms where it's just like, what are you even talking about? Like he'll have things about buried coffee cans in the yard and just all kinds of random things. And I'm like, is this English? Is this what we're talking about? And the title that I came up with is If You're Feeling Froggy, Jump. And it has everything to do with if you feel like your content needs a change, make that change. If you're not having fun in your content anymore, if you don't feel creative in your content, if it's dragging you and like killing you inside to have interviews with boring people on your show and you're just like, why am I doing this? Well, reevaluate it. Like choose fun in your content, choose creativity, choose something that's going to be doable for your personal schedule, your professional schedule. Like it works with you having dinner with your kids every night, or you being able to spend time with your spouse on the weekends, or you being able to just pick up and go whenever you want to go visit family members or hang out with friends. Like, I think that so often people get wrapped up in, and this is me included, okay? Like, I'm not excluding myself at all, but we get so wrapped up in our current pace of life, our current schedules, the comfort zone, the plan where we have everything figured out. And then it's hard to break free from that. And the reason why I really say like I'm including myself in this is because I have woken up the last few days knowing that these changes were coming to my content, knowing that I would have to record this episode today. And I grappled with all the things that we just talked about here. I was like, should I do a bonus episode? Should this be a full episode? Should I tell you all the things? Should I not tell you all the things? Should I just carry on like everything is hunky-dory and nothing has changed? But then you would see all the different changes in my content and then I'd get all these questions. And then I thought, well, this is actually a great opportunity to not only practice what I preach, but if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. And I really wanted to show you that it's possible to make changes. It's possible to tell your audience about changes. And I hope that you will continue to hang out here with me as we go through this evolution of content strategy and content creation, because I'm not going anywhere. That's bottom line. I have no plans to get up and walk away from this podcast or stop producing YouTube videos or abandon my email list and be gone forever. None of that's going to happen. But things are going to be scaled back. Things are going to be a little different around here as I adjust to the new schedules and figuring out what content looks like for Proffitt Media over the next quarter, even the next 12 months of how can I really balance the two and not overwork myself, not overdo it, and still be able to have fun. Because that's really, really, truly what I chase. And it's why we are here at episode 345 of this podcast. Like, how wild is that? 345 episodes. And I have gone through so many changes, so many iterations, and I get questions about this all the time, is how do you know when it's okay to change? How do you know if your audience is going to be okay with it? Well, one, it's okay to change anytime you feel like you need to change. And two, I have no control over what my audience does. I don't. I have no control over whether someone decides to stick around or not come back next week. Like, I have no control over that. But what I do have control over is my integrity, my transparency, and my ability to connect with my audience and really be on the same level as you, like just level with you. This is what's happening. And this is the principles that I want to have in my business, to where you feel the genuine ability for someone to communicate with you, hey, this is what's happening. This is why it's happening. And I don't want you to feel left in the dark. But I also just want you to know, I see you. If you're making changes, I've been there. If you're thinking about doing it, I've grappled with it too. If you're struggling to understand, is this the right move for me or not? Same. I've been there. But being open and honest has always been something that I have valued in my mentors, and it is what I truly wanted to convey here on this podcast. So reach out if you have any questions and let me know that you're here with me on the journey as we continue to evolve and grow as content creators, as strategists, and I'm so excited for what lies ahead, and I hope that you join me on this journey. But make sure you go check out the show notes. So crystalproffitt.com/episode 345. I'm going to also link to, because I know we didn't really talk about it in detail about seasons, but I have a YouTube video and a podcast episode about seasons. So, and I don't like to talk about it too much because I don't do this. I don't do seasons on the podcast, but I have talked about it from perspectives of other people sharing what it's like for them to have seasons of their show, what it's like for them to do seasons of, YouTube videos and email newsletters, and just a few different ways that you could use seasons. So go to the show notes, crystalproffitt.com/episode 345 to check out that content, because I think that is a great option for a lot of people. It's just not something I have a ton of experience with, but I do have some content about it. So again, go to the show notes, crystalproffitt.com/episode 345. But that's all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for being a listener. And if this is your 345th time tuning in, thank you so much for being here with me through this whole wild ride of content creation. And I am so blessed to have you as a listener, and I hope that you hang around with us. I would love it if you would take a screenshot wherever you're listening to this episode, tag me on Instagram, let me know what your number one takeaway was for today, or just whatever you want to say about today's episode. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Proffitt Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, "Send Crystal a text message." And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, "Send Crystal a text message." And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.